W is capital. And the restrooms are, you make your first left outside of the store, they're actually right on your left. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Rodney Raleigh, who's going to set the stage for our session. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you. So good morning. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm so happy that so many people are here actually to have this conversation. It's so necessary. And I do want to highlight, since we're going to be talking about wealth building, Ted Howard at the back, founder of Democracy Collaborative, very influential, powerful voice in terms of framing all this work. So I just want to give a shout out to Ted for kind of helping us set the intellectual framework for a lot of the conversation today, and a lot of the work that's happening. It's really fascinating having this conversation today, though. I was talking to Zach, and so for a little bit of personal bio, I'm from Baltimore. I just moved here last year. Zach is also from Baltimore, went to the same high school. He's like a younger version of me. I see myself when I used to have promise. No gray hairs, accepted. So one of the things that Zach and I was talking about just a moment ago was the fact that just today, Slack, which is a technology company startup, listed this day. It was initially priced at $26 a share and actually opened up at about $39, pricing the company at $26 billion, $26.2 billion. Right? It's not a profitable company. And the reason I bring this up is because within the context of where we are, like literally geographically, where we are, where that wealth is going, this extractive wealth that is built on no profitability. It's the wealth that is built is not going to be distributed to anyone in this room, anyone of the folks the communities that we're really committed to serving. And so it's really setting the stage for thinking about the kind of economy that we have today, in which just a few months ago when Uber listed, when it went public, one investor invested $25,000 several years ago. Just by a guess of terms of how much money you think that person was able to make, just a couple of hands really quickly. Anyone want to have a guess? I'm just going to go to you.
$2 million.
Yeah. How much?
$2 million.
One more.
20.
$125 million. $25,000 investment. So the reason, again, this is why we're having these conversations, because the reality is where our economy is situated today it's been accelerating in terms of wealth inequality, accumulation of wealth at the detriment of communities and rural people, right? And so, in being here again, you can see the stark contrast, right? In terms of what the economy, the sort of market economy in quotations looks like, and what it really means for day-to-day lives, right? Just by show of hands, really quickly, how many funders do we have in the room? How many? Show of hands. Fantastic. How many sort of grassroots activists, advocates that we have in the room? Awesome. And other nonprofits, just in general. Any investors, or anyone who considers themselves an investor? Okay. Just want to get a sense of what we had in the room. So again, I'm going to actually borrow from Democracy Collaborative in terms of the actual definition, where I will really from the definition in terms of what community wealth building actually is. And so community wealth building is really about working towards a more democratic and just economy that is locally rooted and actually about self-sustaining for that local community. Right? And so that's the crux of it. It's really a conversation about place. It's a conversation moving from extraction into regeneration, and into conversation Zach and I were having, potentially even reparations, right? And so I wanted to begin with that. I think many of us know where we are in terms of where the economy is, right? So I mentioned those two examples, Slack and Uber, but those are really kind of mini case studies in terms of what we look like, the extraction that occurs in our economy, and the vast acceleration of wealth inequality, right? And so we're now at a point where wealth inequality is at its highest point in modern history. That's where we are, right? And so we talk a lot about the success of the economy, but we don't talk about the fact that wages haven't raised for folks. We haven't had a conversation about what it looks like when you have so many people. 1% of individuals in the U.S. only 40% of the wealth. So think about that. The amount of wealth that has been accrued over the last several years for those who can participate in what we call the market economy has been pretty significant. So much so that billionaires could actually pay, like the wealth that's been accumulated over the last, and just increased last year, was about $762 billion, would kind of wipe away all of extreme poverty in the world. That's where we are. And so community wealth building is really talking about what these folks are doing it. It's really having a conversation and having action about how do you center communities and individuals above capital, right? So that's one conversation. It doesn't make sense that one person can invest $25,000 and get $125 million. Right? Imagine what that would look like for the drivers at Uber, for example, if there was some distribution of that wealth, right? And so wanted to situate that. Zach and I were talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates just presented to Congress about the question of reparations. The reason why I want to bring that into the conversation is because obviously we're in a very diverse community. In terms of the U.S., we're trending toward being majority people of color, and I like to now say the new majority, right? And so by 2040 or so, we're likely to be majority people of color. That's what the projections are. But the reality is that just next year, the majority of people 18 and under will be majority people of color. In 10 years, majority of people 30 and under will be majority people of color. And in our public schools, we already have majority students of color. Right? So in many of our institutions and communities, we can see how this is reflected. The reason why this is really profoundly powerful is that the racial wealth gap, particularly if you're looking at African American and white households, median wealth, is significant. Almost any kind of study is anywhere between that. There's 121,000 for white households, 9,000 for African American households, right? And so that's pretty profound. And in places like Boston, which the median wealth for an African American household is 8,000. So I want us to think about what it will look like and the point at which the new majority is in existence. And we have these far-reaching racial wealth gaps, right? I mean, it's really a chasm, not really a gap. A gap seems like it's very easy to kind of leap over, right? So that's where we are, and the historical context of that is very important for us to think about. And that's why I think the conversation Ta-Nehisi had with Congress, really grappling with the history of reparations or the need for reparations in this country. Not just thinking about slavery, but that's really important because this country was built on the backs of slaves, and the reality of the enormous wealth that was accumulated. When we think about the technology economy now, that was effectively U.S. slavery, right? In terms of the hold of the enormousness of it, right? And you cannot escape it. Then we can also talk about Jim Crow, we can talk about numbers, we can talk about redlining. A lot of things are happening today. Almost every week it seems like some bank is being sued for predatory lending practices, et cetera, that actually show up in terms of racial wealth gaps. And so we're living on that today. And this is exactly why we be having this conversation. This is why I'm really excited to have, really just kind of facilitate this dialogue with some tremendous folks that are doing great work locally. So with that said, I'm just going to kind of just quickly introduce everyone, and then we'll kick into a conversation. So Zach Murray, right here to my side, Oakland Community Land Trust. We have Valerie Jameson with the Richmond Community Development Enterprise. So thank you both. Vanessa Bransford with Democracy at Work Institute. And then Elizabeth Arredondo, Teamworks Clean. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to just kind of pose a couple of questions, question to everyone, and we'll kind of get into a more broader dialogue, right? So that's feel right for everyone. So actually, I'm going to start with Valerie. Valerie, can you talk a bit about community ownership as it relates to your work? You have a very kind of collective decision-making process, right? A democratic process. So can you talk a little bit about that, the history of the organization, and how you arrived at it?
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me? Great. So hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Jameson, as was mentioned, and I want to highlight that there's actually this handout that's in the back. If you're interested, I only have so much time, so this is going to cover a lot of the content of our history, our mission, and our values. But I do want to underscore that, what's not written here. And beyond anything, our focus, our mission is really thinking about how we're bringing what I call homegrown leaders. I like to consider myself a homegrown leader to the forefront of development, to the forefront to a process that, I want to riff off of what you're sharing. There's a legacy of extraction and exclusion, things that are done by design, and we're looking at now the inverse of redlining. And in the Bay Area, we have to really discuss this conversation at length. But to go back to the history of our organization and how we were founded, Richmond is a complicated city. It's one that has been really held together by private interests. And so Chevron is in our backyard and has played a huge role in everything, in not only in employment, but in the political realm, in the way that local mom and pop nonprofits get funded, and the way that people kind of derive sides and opinions around just a lot of the political landscape. And that's important because in 2014, when the Berkeley Global Campus news was released that UC Berkeley was going to be heavily investing on the shoreline, 142 acres, and it was going to be a marvelous partnership with the city, with residents. A 18-month process started with advocates and leaders around what a community benefits agreement could possibly be. I mean, from an advocacy standpoint, we were pushing for a CBA. We were pushing to make sure that the commitments were ironclad and in writing. And what happened at the end of 2016, that some of you I'm hoping know, is that project was canceled. Effectively pulled off the table. There were a lot of things happening at the university level. And what that did to us as residents was it put us in a position where we've been fighting so long, thinking that we were gaining some kind of upper hand, some leverage and some position of power within being able to yield long-term benefits for our own community, for that process to just be taken away. And what that informed was the need to be at the forefront of development projects. Because the reality is, you will see developers and external people will come in to try to engage in a project, and all of the services that they are utilizing, they outsource, like the technical, technical capabilities, all of these things. If we put those connections and those networks at the hands of local residents, we can make meaningful projects. We could be, centering our work, building our community in a healthy and sustainable way. So in 2017, planning committee was formed based on people who were really jaded by what happened with the Berkeley Global Campus, and we created the vision for the RCDE. And so in 2018, we started recruiting people for our board. I was one of those members. I was recruited onto the board with the intention that we are rooted in Richmond. We want to see Richmond grow. We want to define what a Richmond developer will be, one that is really trying to disrupt the traditional development paradigm. And so while we are at that base level, because 2018 to 2019, I'm in my first month as a staff. So I moved out of on a volunteer basis to really trying to grow legs for this organization. As we raised the capital, the infrastructure to be a developer, we knew that we couldn't stay silent in conversations around development. So last year, there was a another really big conversation around our shoreline again. So we have a lot of shoreline, 3/4 of our kind of area covered around shoreline. And so it was, I'm not sure if you all have heard, but Point Mulati is a part of the shoreline for Richmond. It's publicly owned by the city, but it's been there's been litigation around that piece of land. And we made the conscious decision to engage in that development, although we knew it wasn't perfect, because we needed to center the conversation around equity. For so long, the conversation was being driven, by the market developer who had the plans, by some progressive advocates and environmentalists who were trying to gain protections, but the conversation around local residents was moved. So we, engaged in that process, and we not only participated in the traditional community engagement process, which, a consulting company got $250,000 to do an engagement process, of which we not only intersected, but we really drove that process. We drove their process. We did a parallel process. We informed their report. Granted, they took all of our nice language, but they still didn't really put the meat of our recommendations. So that's why we needed to produce our own report with our own concept map. And we then took that information, took the residents who were mobilizing and pushed on the city and said, hey, we were involved every step of the way, and this is what we contributed to that process. We also should have our concept map and our report included in the RFP. We were successful in gaining that. So these were all kind of like test points of like, how much influence, how much sway, how much can we influence this process that oftentimes residents don't feel that they have access to. And so we were successful in changing the RFP language and being considered like a part of that engagement. Beyond that, we were in talks. We always wanted to developer. So we were looking at whether we were going to pursue, submission of the RFP. And because of the landscape, and I'm happy to talk about it more offline, the political landscape in Richmond, because I'm not shy about it. There was a lot of coercion and a lot of misdirection. One developer who was going to be the master developer who we were looking to partner with effectively decided not to submit. Despite us creating terms of commitments, despite us really thinking about the technical pieces so that we can be in partnership. But all that to say that we did work in this avenue, in this arena, holding true to our values that elevated the conversation amongst residents, empowered folks to feel like they could step into this field, really holding accountable our public officials, especially because Richmond for the past few years has really been touting that it has a progressive city council. So we were really, pushing and leaning on those folks to put some action into that. And then we were, successful with the minimal, with the less than 5 hours of work we were actually able to put, because we had our own jobs at that point. I was working at a school. So all that to say, we have started our process still with that vision of building out so we can be the developers, so we can look at these different models, but we are not shying away from the advocacy and policy piece, because we don't want, while we are building out and growing our entity, we don't want these big developments to continue to not be held accountable and to not have equity at the core. So we were heavily engaged there, and I would say that there were a lot of successes. We at some point even had the opportunity to lead a CBA for this, for the Point Milani project in particular, but given the constraints, and then again, we can talk offline, we decided that wasn't really where our focus was. We wanted our focus to be in the flats, our focus to be in the neighborhoods where our board, that's majority Richmond residents, where our community, our constituents say we need to be fighting. And so from that, last month, we started our fellowship, which is so there's 6 Richmond residents who are anchored by 3 organizations. These organizations are really important for partnership because they're base building organizations. They have organizing and advocacy at their core. And we're asking them, what were your development priorities? How can you put Richmond residents who are also in your organization to develop these broader concepts and for us to work in partnership? So we have initiated that process, and through that, we're continuing to work towards defining what our community wants and working towards it. So some of that, and I'll preview it, but it might be partnerships around community land trust. Might be partnerships around, we have a lot of redevelopment land, and really establishing a plan for how we acquire that land and how we do that work. So I'm really excited, and hopefully we can talk more about it.
Thank you for sharing. Whenever I hear like, I'm always amazed by how much work is being done, right? I think the complexity of it all, right? So everything you talk about is all super interrelated, in the depth in which we all have to work to move things forward. I'm always surprised by it. So next, Zach, obviously housing and land have been really important for ownership, right, purposes. What was really interesting, so even I think towards the end of last year, Andre Perry at Brookings Institute evaluated that African American real estate was devalued by about $150 billion. 600. Wow, so I was way up. All right. And then I think very recently there was a study that looked at just the problematic nature of how the private markets in terms of real estate and housing have been problematic for African American and Latino households. And so obviously what you're doing at Oakland Trust is obviously. And so I think within this context, I mean, can you share what work is in terms of making kind of shifting the trajectory for communities of color?
Thank you, and thanks to the Asset Funders Network for hosting this really excellent conversation. Once again, my name is Zach Murray with Oakland Community Land Trust, and I think our work in sum is exactly as you put it, Valerie. We're shifting the paradigm of development. We're creating and really democratizing development for communities of color, for low-income communities in the world, the very nuanced world of development. 2019 is actually a very significant year for Community Land Trust. It's the 10th anniversary of Oakland Community Land Trust, and we're going to be proudly celebrating that this November. But it's also the 50th anniversary of the CLT movement as a whole. For those of you who don't know, the Community Land Trust movement is really rooted in the Civil Rights Movement. The first community land trust that was started in this country in 1969 was in Albany, Georgia, and it was started by leaders who included Shirley Sherrod, her husband Charles Sherrod, Reverend Charles Sherrod, Slater King, a cousin of Dr. King. And these folks were able to acquire a 1,000-acre former plantation and to create an agricultural commune for former sharecroppers. And throughout the history of new communities incorporated as they came to be known, they dealt with a lot of opposition from local and state government, from the USDA, that really effectively undermined the model. They lost their land at one point in the 1980s, but were able to regain the land back, picked for USDA lawsuit. And so the land trust work really is about creating space for oppressed communities, creating, in a sense, extending the mission of the civil rights movement to create and establish a beloved community. And so in Oakland, this work really took form in 2009, coming out of the height of the foreclosure crisis. And as you all know, subprime lending and really devastating loan products were offered to African Americans, primarily in this community, and other communities of color at the height of a bubble. And so for people in my parents' generation, they were getting their first access to loans at a time when prices were greatly inflated. And we're still reeling from that. But what happened in Oakland and what really got us into this work was 13,000 of those foreclosed properties are loans in the region and the country. And that had a very devastating impact on displacement. It literally removed the right of some former homeowners to exist in this city ever again. And we're reeling from that. We're seeing the homelessness that has really taken shape, double, triple, quadrupled since that crisis. And so our work was to take those homes. At that time, Oakland was dealing with blight and with vacancy. And our mission was really about community stabilization, about taking real estate owned properties and converting them back to stable ownership, to community controlled ownership. And we were able to seize in 2009, 19 single family homes, which is 1% of 1% of 1% of what the crisis really was, but that we're able to offer permanently affordable home ownership to low income folks in this community. And in the 10 years, all of our residents of those initial homes have remained. I wish I could say that the progress at that time continued and built up, but we really, as an entity, didn't see a lot of heavy investment beyond that initial 19 homes until more recently, as the displacement crisis has really exploded and affected all corners of the region. There's been a need for entities like OCLT to fulfill preservation of affordable housing. And what we identified in that work is that in Oakland, the majority of the housing is small site. Literally 88% of our housing stock is under 25 units. You see it, 42% of it alone is single family. The majority of those 13,000 homes that were purchased were single family homes. And importantly, rent control did not exist in those single family homes. And so we literally have situations to this day in which tenants of properties in the city receive notices of rents that were $1,200 being doubled to $2,400, tripled to $3,600. And the interventions, the ability of our city and of our communities to intervene is extremely limited. And so we've been working to carve out a model for preservation that really looks at the fact that there aren't sufficient state, federal, resources for small site preservation and to work to create that model locally. And so that involved first partnering with the community now known as Liberated 23rd Avenue, which was actually our first multifamily mixed-use property acquisition. It took place in 2017, 2018, in which after the Ghost Ship fire, a lot of folks' lives were lost. The landlord decided to get out of the business and realized that they wanted to keep the community that was there and had been building up over 2 decades in the building, but needed to get out of the landlord business. And worked with that community, essentially extended a first right of refusal to the tenants there. And because those tenants had built up a lot of really important community work, presence in the community, they include a bike shop that trains neighborhood young residents to repair bikes, offers bikes to young people, for trans artists and creatives, includes a community garden. They built up a lot of credibility in the community and were able to raise $90,000 in a matter of weeks. But unfortunately, in $1 million market, as exists here in the Bay Area, $90,000 doesn't quite cut it anymore. And so it was really important they found development partners. We were able to sit down and realize that the community there and OCLT had shared values. Cooperative ownership and permanent affordability were 2 of the shared values. And we were able to put some equity into the deal, and as an experienced developer in the city of Oakland, to secure a forgivable loan, site acquisition loan in the city of Oakland. The tenants, the 8 low-income units and the 4 commercial units on the rents that folks are paying there, that they're able to pay down a mortgage, and that we can figure out how to build a model towards cooperative ownership in this mixed-use property. And that was really the first ripple of really making it tangible for people in Oakland that community ownership is possible, that anti-displacement and preservation of communities are possible. And so we come to realize in the course of that work, and I want to say that that model is also extending. We've acquired 2 additional multifamily properties, but also single-family properties. Again, those rent notices coming in, a very powerful community organizer who I just learned today is involved with one of the cooperatives on the panel. Just an amazing testament to the networks that are building. Found out that her rent increase was happening, but also that 4 of her neighbors were getting the very exact same rent increase, and managed to oppose those rent increases. We're able to get a stable rent, but then partnered with an organization called Alliance for Californians for Community Empowerment, ACE, and with Oakland Community Land Trust, and we're able to secure the purchase of 3 of those 4 properties into the land trust this past year. And we worked to bring in some of the available subsidy to the city of Oakland to do that. We were able to move a 4th family into another affordable housing development and are working on a 4th home purchase from that same portfolio. And so it's really about figuring out how to piece together integrated capital, how to secure commitments both from the public sector and the private sector. But what's one, the county bond in Alameda County, it costs an average of at least $600,000 to produce a new unit. So when we talk about scale, which is always the question that's being thrown at land trust, well, how do you get to scale? No one is achieving scale. Sure, one developer who's larger can bring in tax credits to build 100 units, but 4,000 families have been displaced in the region at the same time, right? And so the question is about transformation of the paradigms. The question is really to be about scaling community control, because community control provides the permanent stability and base from when you know, the research is there, that land trusts have a less than 2% rate of delinquency and foreclosure, right? That subprime lending have a 25% or more rate of the prime loans have a nearly double-digit rate in some cases. And so why can't we in this region to save up for a down payment for some folks who are earning median income? And so it's time to really shift the paradigm. I think it has to be in creating assets for people through ownership and utilizing the community to just to talk a little bit about the work, we've realized in Oakland that in order to be successful, you've got to create successes regionally, is that there has to be land trust in all the communities. We certainly are maneuvering and figuring out the ways to establish presence in Oakland and to expand our model. And I'm actually happy to report that we've secured in the upcoming budget cycle an allocation of $12 million annually over the next 2 years for permanent affordability in this community. That money will support land trust and limited equity cooperatives. Yes, please apply. Important work, but it was available because this community passed in that bond that money needs to be prioritized for preservation. And so we would support, hopefully that budget passes on Monday, but I think it will. And so now it's time for the private sector to step up and to align funding, loans, to ensure that we can take down that subsidy. We have the public commitment. Now we need to strategically secure private sector commitments for this very efficient, successful model of anti-displacement and preservation. So in order for our work in Oakland to be successful, land trusts have to exist and be viable in communities all across the region. And we're actually invested in working to help make that happen through our work in coalition with groups including Barrier for All, which is an Oakland collaborative for preservation, and also the People's Land and Housing Alliance. OCLG actually hosted a convening for the region, and really a lot of people across the state, to help bring attention to land trusts and cooperatives. We're working as a staff of 3, providing technical assistance to communities in San Jose who are actually there with some of our support, working to incorporate, as we speak, the South Bay Community Land Trust, working to support the establishment of land trusts in North Richmond, in Vallejo. And so we understand that this is going to require a real regional effort. I think that that's been a movement that's been happening legislatively and in some of the CASA proceedings, but the preservation piece of that puzzle has really been lackluster and missing. And so we think that folks of assets, we think that foundations and funders really have to take the lead in helping to mitigate the risk with this, because we know that displacement isn't addressed by production. Displacement is only addressed by plugging the hole that's leading to the displacement. And preservation through land trusts and cooperatives are one mechanism to do that. And so we need all parties, nonprofits, funders, et cetera, invested in shifting where the state, local, and county resources come from. And I think we have a model in Oakland we can expand across and work to build upon. And so I'll kind of cut it off there. But thank you all again for your time.
There's a lot to pack with Zach just pointed out. A couple things I just wanted to reemphasize as well. So Zach pointed out that the CLT movement's been around for at least 50 years, I would say at least, right? And one of the things I think is really important about that, because the reality is oftentimes we use language like new economy and other things like that, but the reality is that a lot of this work is actually historic. It comes from a number of communities that we can draw from. It's that, again, just to contrast it to what's happening and the market economy right now. Venture capital last year in the U.S. was $110 billion, right? 75% of venture capital investors do not return back as capital. So when we're talking about like risk and opportunities to invest into communities, really looking at the fact that when you're investing in communities, there's some very, when we talk about that paradigm, really contrasting it versus how it approaches when you're talking about communities, communities of color, etc. So I'm really excited for this next conversation. I pointed out earlier, not to keep driving down on tech, but that one investor invests $25,000 into Uber, gets $125 million, and yet the vast majority of Uber drivers are actually like one mitigation of like labor practices, etc. And many are actually low-wage employed, etc. And so when I think about the work that Democracy at Work Institute is doing around cooperative work ownership, I think, well, what would it look like if Uber, what you're doing in terms of work ownership is really profound, and so you can share a bit about it.
Yes, thank you so much, Rodney. So great, it's wonderful to be here with you all today. Again, my name is Vanessa Brandsburg. I work at the Democracy at Work Institute. And I always like to start with defining worker ownership, just so that we're all on the same page. And then I'd like to just share with you some of the strategies that we've been using along with our partners to expand worker ownership. So worker cooperatives are a business that are owned and controlled by the people in them. And so essentially, each person has a vote for all the decisions that are made. And we see worker cooperatives actually as a tool for job creation, for business ownership, for closing the wealth gap, for preventing business closures, and for much more. And so for Democracy at Work Institute, what we've really been focused on since we began our work in 2014, when we were born out of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, our sister organization, is that we're really looking to expand worker cooperative model to reach communities that are most directly affected by inequality, social and economic inequalities, specifically people of color, recent immigrants, and low-wage workforces. And so just to give you a bit of an idea of kind of the state of the sector, the field right now, based on a survey that we did recently from data in 2017, who are the people that are organizing into worker cooperatives? So we are actually seeing that they are people that are typically locked out of the market. They are people experiencing different kinds of barriers to finding jobs. They're contractors, so people that may be working independently but maybe don't find enough work or enough good paid work. Also, cooperatives are actually majority run by women, something that we found, as well as communities of color are really taking up this model and organizing a lot of different, within a lot of different industries. Also, something that I'll be talking about now a little bit more in depth is that conversion. Businesses that are traditionally owned by somebody who is maybe interested in sharing that ownership or transferring the ownership of that business to their workers. So we're actually seeing that every year, hundreds of thousands of businesses owned in part by the retiring owners become candidates for employee takeovers. So this is clearly an opportunity. And so building wealth through conversions is a strategy that we at Democracy at Work Institute, along with many partners that we work with, have invested in. And so why is this? Well, because currently the largest generational wealth transfer is happening right now. And so really it's an immediate opportunity to build local economies and keep these businesses and to really in the local communities and address the inequalities at their root. And this is by creating ownership of business assets. And so what are we doing around the conversion strategy? Well, one of the really exciting projects that we're involved in is called a Shared Equity and Economic Development Fellowships, or SEED. And this is where we take city leaders from across the country and convene them to be able to develop their expertise in building equitable local economies using democratic business ownership models. And so what does this look like? So it takes into consideration their peer learning, leadership development, and then also strategy design support. So currently this week, there's a cohort of peers meeting in Washington, D.C. For their gathering. We're also involved in a national collaborative of tech assistance providers that support conversions on the ground. So we're working with capital providers, with attorneys, those that value the businesses from the beginning stages to the end of the actual conversion happening. And then the other program that is really exciting and is actually very relevant to this area, because San Francisco is one of the first areas where the Legacy Business Initiative started, is also something that we're really excited about and very involved in as well, and we're trying to promote around the country. So the other sort of strategy that we think is really important alongside from conversions is thinking about new model livelihoods at the moment, importance of them. The importance of addressing the challenges that people with barriers to work experience. And so just to put a little bit of a historical context, if you think about between the mid-1970s and the mid-2000s, it was well known that worker cooperatives were taken up by folks to be able to exit the economy and really enjoy the democratization of labor, to really be able to have alternative ways of working. But interestingly, in the mid-2000s, we started seeing sort of the reverse of that. People taking on worker ownership to really enter the economy and to be able to have access to good work. So the other interesting thing about this sort of newer component in the last 20 years or so is that we've seen this trend more geared towards immigrants and other people that have experienced barriers to work. And so based on our work in the field of worker co-op development and ecosystem organizing, we now know that immigrant-led cooperatives are the fastest growing worker co-op sector. And then a lot of this is actually expedited because the field of cooperative development is really expanding. There's a lot of folks really interested in supporting cooperative development. What we're doing now in terms of new models is we are piloting a new project called the Rapid Response Development Project, which is essentially a replicable, out-of-the-box worker-owned business, kind of like a staffing agency, where we're really interested in creating pathways to work for people that have barriers to work and that are also a part of the gig economy. And so these rapid response co-ops, or RRC, would aggregate the resources to market the members' services, negotiate contracts, and provide backup. We're really interested in creating a guaranteed payment pool so that no matter what, the members are getting paid on time, even if the client is not paying when they need to. And so we are really doing this by synthesizing a lot of the work that we've done over the years and learning the learnings, the vetting of documents, of the operating agreements, of different templates, of talking with different attorneys and technical assistance providers, and taking it and creating a toolkit just so that this can be done in a faster manner, because people can't wait, to kind of see out the development of a co-op, as sometimes it can take a little bit of time, like in any business. And so we are really thinking that the direct impact of the rapid response cooperative development co-ops, it will basically allow people to have access to professional networks, companies to contract rapid response co-ops rather than individual, so that it would allow the people with barriers to employment to be able to work under the limited liability company cooperatives. And just the last piece that I wanted to share around the strategy and sort of thinking about how a worker co-op and sort of how approaching the worker co-op model as a strategy to closing the wealth gap is the importance of building the capacity of existing businesses, of existing cooperatives. And so this is important because we really want to make sure that we're starting these co-ops so that they're actually sustained and they're able to grow and they're effective and effective. And so a lot of the work that we're doing with partners provide a training school for Líder en Cooperativistas en Acción, which is a training for worker owners that are interested in becoming peer advisors. It was run all in Spanish. Elizabeth was one of the members of that cohort, and she'll talk about that. And then the asset protection trainings that we provided. So we're really interested in kind of highlighting these three different areas that I mentioned as a way to really uplift the worker cooperative model. The retaining and closing the wealth gaps through conversions, the creating the pathways to work, such as using new models of rapid response, and then lastly, building the capacity with, so maybe I'll just close there.
Thanks for sharing, Vanessa. Thanks for the segue as well, because so Elizabeth is a worker owner, right, at Teamworks, and so it'd be great to hear about what that's been like for you, that experience, and just sort of what it's like to be a worker owner. I don't know how many people in the audience actually know what that's like. Awesome. Great.
I feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish. So Vanessa is gonna help me with. Bueno, mi nombre es Elizabeth Arredondo, soy miembro de la cooperativa de Teamworks, un negocio de limpieza de casas en el área de Silicon Valley.
My name is Elizabeth Arredondo, and I am a member of the Teamworks Cooperative.
Desde hace 11 años, y cómo ser miembro de la cooperativa ha ayudado en mi vida.
I started about 11 years ago, and I'm going to talk about how the cooperative impacted my life.
Yo inicié como limpiadora de casas, tiempo completo, de lunes a viernes, y por 3 años estuve participando en diferentes actividades dentro de la cooperativa.
So I started working full-time, doing cleaning from Monday to Friday, and then I started participating in committees, doing different kinds of work for the cooperative.
Se me dio la oportunidad de participar o de hacer administración y contabilidad dentro del negocio por un aproximado de 10 horas a la semana, que era lo que se necesitaba en ese entonces.
I started out by participating in the administration and the bookkeeping within the cooperative at about 10 hours a week.
¿Cómo la cooperativa ha ayudado a la economía de cada uno de nuestros miembros? Y yo soy una de los miembros que ha sido beneficiado de esto.
The cooperative has helped the economy or the economic well-being of the members, and I'm one of those participants that have benefited.
El sistema de pago de la cooperativa es el principal factor que incluye a que nuestros miembros tengamos beneficios como aseguranza de deshabilidad, aseguranza médica privada, distribuciones de ganancias, vacaciones o tiempo libre pagado y otros beneficios económicos.
The payment system of the cooperative is the principal factor that has influenced and impacted our members. For example, including benefits like medical insurance, private disability insurance, profit distributions, and vacation, and time off, paid time off.
Cuando inicié la cooperativa fue en el tiempo de la recesión económica, aproximadamente del 2008-2010. En aquellos momentos la cooperativa decidió tomar decisiones un poco drásticas para asegurar la economía de nuestro negocio y decidimos bajar o alterar nuestro sistema de pago para ayudar a la economía de la cooperativa.
So when I started the cooperative, it was the time of the recession around 2008 to 2010, and which those moments the cooperative had made some drastic decisions, and we actually decided to lower the pay of the members to be able to help with our economy or our financial well-being. And now that after the cooperative, keep the business afloat.
Eso es lo que hace la diferencia de ser miembro dueño de un negocio como este.
This is what makes the difference between being an employee and having a business where you're a worker owner.
Tomar las decisiones que del lugar de ser participante de las decisiones, del lugar de donde trabajas.
To be able to participate in the decisions of the workplace that you belong to.
Hace 9 años, mi participación en la administración empezó a incrementar. Ahora la cooperativa es manejado completamente por 2 miembros que iniciamos.
The cooperative 9 years ago, and at this point, we've included 2 members to participate in the administration.
Ahora tengo tiempo completo junto con una de las fundadoras de la cooperativa.
I participate in the work full time along with the other members.
Ese es otro beneficio que económicamente el modelo de trabajo donde participo.
Okay, so this has
Inicié bookkeeping y un poco de administración. Hacemos junto con otra de mis compañeras, Bianca Sánchez, hacemos atención a clientes, ventas, operaciones diarias, todo lo que administración y contabilidad necesitan.
I started out doing bookkeeping and administration, but now with my colleague Bianca Sanchez, I participate in the sales, the dealing with the clients, with the rest of the administration, the accounting.
Somos desarrolladores, participamos también en otro proyecto que se llama el Instituto de Teamworks, que es pequeño porque tiene un par de años que lo hemos desarrollado, pero también es parte del proyecto en general de lo que es Teamworks o la comunidad de Teamworks.
We also participate in Teamworks Institute, which was formed out of the Teamworks Cooperatives, which is small in the sense that it just got started a few years ago, but we are all very involved in that project.
Quería mencionar porque son 2 diferentes, tienen el mismo nombre, pero son 2 diferentes entidades.
I wanted to mention this because we are 2 different entities, Teamworks Cooperative, Teamworks Institute, but we work with one another.
El proyecto que que Vanessa, en el cual participamos Bianca y yo, fue un proyecto donde nos ayudó para desarrollar y ser parte del Instituto de Teamworks con el tiempo.
The project that Vanessa mentioned called Líder Cooperativas en Acción, which I participated in, my colleague Bianca Sanchez, helped us to develop our ability to be peer advisors and consultants for the Teamworks Institute.
La mayoría de los proyectos o de los negocios, de este tipo de negocios, están desarrollados o estamos acostumbrados a verlos desarrollados por institutos, por instituciones grandes y desarrolladas cooperativas. Lo que es Teamworks es como contrario a lo que al como es comúnmente.
So we typically see these businesses or cooperatives being developed by large cooperative developers, but Teamworks has a different approach in providing mentorship.
La cooperativa de Teamworks tiene 14 años viviendo en el área de Silicon Valley y el Instituto de Teamworks tiene 3 años que fue creado y creo que eso es lo que hace un poco la diferencia.
Teamworks Cooperative has been around for 14 years.
Tenemos vacaciones, tenemos aseguranza y creo que ese es uno de los beneficios más grandes que uno como trabajador puede tener en este país.
The members of the cooperative have guaranteed payments and have paid vacation, and these are some of the greatest benefits that you can have in this country.
Y también fui parte de la mesa directiva de Democracy at Work Institute y apenas hace 2 semanas se terminó mi periodo después de 3 años y he estado envuelta en el movimiento de cooperativas desde hace 9 años. Y creo que ya está. Gracias.
I was a part of the board of directors of the Democracy at Work Institute for the last 3 years. I just finished my term, and I've been involved in the cooperative movement for the last 9 years. That's all I
have. So let's give it a pause. Question for our amazing panel. But before I do that, I want to make sure that there were any quick clarifying questions, and there will be an opportunity for audience Q&A with panel. But what I mean by that is, for example, like Zach mentioned, integrated capital, right? And so people might be like, what does that mean, right? So just a couple of quick questions, just to clarify anything that was said, or so they want to quickly follow up with one of the panelists.
This question is for Elizabeth. I'm going to do the question in Spanish. Mi pregunta es Teamworks Institute y quería saber un poco más de el tipo de consultoría que hace Teamworks. So my question in English is, I asked specifically about Teamworks Institute and what kind of consulting you do.
Bueno, el Instituto de Teamworks está un poco más especializado en lo que hacemos nosotros en la red de Teamworks. Somos una cooperativa que se dedica al negocio de limpieza de casa y nosotros consideramos que tenemos la experiencia necesaria para una cooperativa que se dedique al mismo servicio. Hemos participado, hemos ayudado a desarrollar una cooperativa en el sur de California, que es en Lopo.
So the Teamworks Institute specializes in providing a consultation, and the reason that it does that is because it's linked to the Teamworks cooperative, which specializes in the cleaning sector, and we think that we can provide this kind of assistance because we've been in the field for over 14 years. And so we are now providing support to developing cleaning cooperatives.
Una de las razones es porque sabemos por experiencia que el sector de limpieza de casas es un sector bastante grande. La economía de limpieza de casas es mucho, muy grande. Estamos hablando de billones de dólares. Otra cosa que consideramos, y es el sueño de nosotros en Teamworks, es que es uno de los sectores donde las personas que nos dedicamos a hacer este tipo de trabajo no se nos paga lo que debe de ser. No tenemos beneficios, bueno, gracias, yo sí. No, la gente no tiene beneficios como aseguranza médica. El modelo de cooperativas para el negocio de limpieza de casas, que es un negocio, un sector que podemos decir que es muy explotado. Nosotros en Teamworks soñamos o queremos cambiar ese sector, enseñarle a la gente que se puede hacer algo más dentro de lo que... Perdón.
So we have we're looking to see. We know from experience that the sector of cleaning houses is very, very large. It's in the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So our dream at Teamworks is really to be able to tackle this sector. Don't get paid enough, and there's a lot of exploitation, and people don't get good pay. They don't have life insurance, they don't have benefits, they don't have disability insurance. They experience a lot of exploitative factors. And so we really we're in the field of wanting to change the sector and making it so that people have opportunities kind of like we do at Teamworks.
Thank you. So just time for one more quick clarifying question if anyone has any.
What can Zachary Barker bring capital?
Yeah, so we, as you know, affordable housing dollars are very limited, and so we have to become creative in how we piece together capital, especially because the market is cash heavy, investor heavy. And so one of our deals, Pasta Verde Cafe, involved a private offering in which we were able to secure from, I believe, 11 high asset community members, $600,000 towards the purchase of that building, which includes a worker-owned cooperative, the Pasta Verde Cafe, and 2 units of low-income housing. And so basically that community-sourced capital enabled us to execute the deal, and it was on us. So it's really just flexible capital that was available from people in our community that we were able to piece together to secure that deal, and then hopefully some city subsidy can be brought in to help buy down. That's one example of sort of, again, our residents are crowdsourcing. So in addition to securing that money, Pasta Verde on its own raised about $50,000 from their own crowdfunding campaign. So putting together different mechanisms and really, I think, kind of getting in front and committing to being, really all we have is the ability to be creative in this because we don't have the bulk of subsidy aligned towards community land trust yet.
I actually framed that out because it's a good segue for the next question after you. Right? So thanks for asking the question about integrated capital. So the reality is, this work is so complex, right? And a lot of, to Zach's point, a lot of finance and investment is to simplify and easy for the investor, right? And these models do not situate in a very cookie cutter, right, formula. And so it requires a lot of creativity. I oftentimes joke that $1 worker cooperative investment is much more difficult and complicated to pull together than a $25 million traditional real estate investment, right? Because of all the things you have to do, how creative you have to be, the type of mix of capital. The question I have, and because when I saw that, I was really happy that there are a number of funders in the room, and having been here, having been an investor, and we talk about these types of opportunities, I want to hear, and hopefully the panel can be as direct as possible, right? It's a great opportunity to kind of inform and our friends in philanthropy about how you can be helpful work. So I guess the question is really, and anyone can start it off. What advice might you have for a foundation? You mentioned a high asset individual community member for some of the projects, one of the projects that you work on, Zach. But what is your advice for philanthropists? That's philanthropy in particular. But we could talk about program related investments if that's helpful. But philanthropy, what role can philanthropy play in terms of advancing the type of work that you guys are doing? You know, whether that's the particular thing that you're working on, or just like other activities inside the movement in general. And so feel free to, whoever feels moved to begin.
Well, I'll take advantage that I have the mic in front of me. And yeah, you know, I am newer into my role. I'm less than 1 month in to my position, and so I do want to be able to speak, I think, a little bit more audaciously about the idea of funding. The easiest thing for me to say is, you know, having only 2 grants in and investment in our work. I mean, fund us, you know, the baseline. But really beyond this idea of getting funding, I want to think about it as a courageous investment. Because a lot of, I mean, and Zach used the term mitigating risk. I would actually want investors and funders from foundations to lean into the idea of risk, which is, I think, counterintuitive a lot of times to this area of work, because every single day in our communities, as we build out this work, we are risking. We are engaged in active risk as we're building out these creative models, as we're doing this work on the ground. And so my hope is that people with funds understand, what's at stake. And I think you all do. I mean, being in this room, I'm seeing a lot of like head nods, and there's a lot of alignment. But I think about a lot of things, and things that are like catchy phrases, like putting the equity in equity. Like there's a lot of opportunities. Like how do we create, those community investment funds that are accessible for folks on the ground doing the work to be able to gain the traction, to build out development projects. And I mean, one thing with peer funding that I think that exists is, on our end, one of our grants, and I'll just, I'm not going to say who funded us, but we did not have the track record. We're still fiscally sponsored, and so we had to weigh on our partnership. Some of our work, and one of the members on our board is a member of the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society, and so rather than our grant being done and delivered to our fiscal sponsor, they delivered it through Haas. Which was wonderful because the relationship was there, and in many ways we got that grant because of the relationship there. But in other ways, what happened? The university took the overhead of that, and all of that because there wasn't the track record. So that's just an example of the barriers to getting the funds that I would hope foundations would start to really think a little bit more creatively about. Because peer funding, it's like a sink or swim situation. If you are not thinking about the long term, and everything that we are surfacing is like community ownership, well, building that takes time, and that takes a deep investment. And so if you are invested on the forefront, not just thinking about a 1-year relationship where it's like, oh, well, you didn't meet the numbers, you don't have a data record, so we're on to the next. Because that is in itself, that transaction is actually also hurtful, and is also, speaking or supports or is in opposition to, I think, everything that we're trying to fight for. I don't want to monopolize the mic, but those are some of the things that have been just teeming in my head as I started this work.
Thank you. So I'm going to go a little off script really quickly so Ted, I'm going to ask you a question to help with this. I've oftentimes thought that like the amount of the philanthropic capital available for community wealth building specifically is really small, right? So Ted, do you have a sense of just an estimate or a guess that you might have in terms of how much
money?
Yeah.
$38.
It's a very specific number too.
No, I don't, but I think you're exactly right, because community wealth building is this emergent paradigm, even though there's a lot of work underway. Philanthropy is familiar with funding housing, or funding workforce development, or funding these things. Stepping back and looking more systemically at the question of how do we broaden ownership over capital and land and community, that's a relatively new idea. So there are some funders who've been in this game for some time, nationally, like the Surgeon Foundation and the Cummings Foundation and others, but most don't quite get it. So this has been fascinating for me, because I would love to see this conversation happening with local people in 50 different communities, with local funders that are uploading something out of the water.
Thanks, Ted. And the reason why I wanted to that Ted, I mean, he's been in this work for quite some time, working with funders. And I know for me, I mean, I had a conversation with Steve Dubs, who's a member of our network and a former colleague at Tex. Sort of like maybe it's like $15–20 million maybe at best. And the reason why I want to bring it up for folks in the room and this conversation is a very small sliver. I think part of it is like how do we get more into it to kind of like bring attention to that fact. So there's a lot of great activity. So I just want to like just frame that really quickly about like where we are probably like philanthropically, like how do we expand that and really encourage more and more investment. But I don't want to monopolize either. So, so any kind of other ideas?
Wanted to mention maybe for philanthropy in particular, commitment to developing ecosystems that really enable community ownership, cooperative ownership to be successful. It does take a lot of deep work to build. Really, all the kind of cylinders have to be hit. And so I think a commitment to the development of the ecosystem. The other part, just to extend the tech analogy really quickly, is that, for example, Uber and Lyft were essentially allowed to go to market as nonprofits, right? They have been securing billions and billions of dollars.
Because they were losing.
Right, losing. Absolutely, no balance quotient, right? And so, you know, billions and billions of dollars have been poured into an investment, ultimately into speculation, right? The idea that one day they'll own enough market share or market control to come back and ask for PRI. It's unfortunate that we hear things on the investment side of foundations like, well, that's anti-capitalist. The reality is that we have to understand at this point in time that the provision of affordable housing is not something where a profit can be extracted, right? Is that it's got us into the crisis that we experience right now. That the developer fees and the accelerating costs, right, have created a grave inefficiency that's resulting in the lives of Black people being placed on the streets, right, in our community here in Oakland. And so, you know, there has to be, I think, the investment in permanent solutions to this type of crisis. There has to be a commitment to transformation of how we do housing, and it has to start locally from the ground up. We've used really a decade of austerity to not really envision about what alternatives need to look like, but we've been privatizing. I use the metaphor of charter housing, right? That we committed to a public-private solution that ultimately is more expensive than just providing the good itself. And so I think foundations, it goes back to the conversation about mitigating risk, but really the proactive side of it is restorative economics. Many of these foundations got their billions, right, that 95% parked away through extraction, right? Workers of communities. And so I think really communities is incredibly important to me, and one of the ways that we get to permanent solution in lieu of reparations. But in the context of reparations, really quickly, it's not just important the payment or the acknowledgement of what is owed. It's important also that we're creating the conditions we're reparating into. If we're reparating into debt peonage, if we're reparating into a situation where the majority of Black people are forced into renting, right, and are excluded from markets, that's not conditions worthy of reparations. If we're reparating into an economy that doesn't provide health care for all, that doesn't allow Black folks to take whatever earning and inheritance they've gotten to move into an economy free of the threat of not having health care, that's not worthy of the type of transformation that reparations really requires. And so I just think that foundations should dig a lot deeper into questioning their commitment and their alliance to capitalism.
So before we move on, Elizabeth, anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would just say that in terms of access in the world of, so worker cooperatives are challenged at times by accessing capital from traditional lenders, and so there are some friendly co-op lenders out there. It's like a handful of them. And so one way that a funder can potentially support the increase of access to capital is by dedicating funding for loan loss reserves that allow traditional CDFIs, community development, financial institutions, and other lenders to make riskier non-traditional loans. So that's just one thing I would say, just to fill that gap, you know?
One thing I would add to that in terms of loan loss reserve, and this is kind of, don't want to out anyone, so I'm not going to get specific about it. But effectively, actually, no, it's not outing, it's our information anyway. But one of the things, I would take an example of, we talk about loan guarantees as well. And so there's a habit for particularly larger foundations to provide loan guarantees to private capital market providers, which is a strategy. And also, another strategy is actually to provide those sort of opportunities directly to the actual projects, right? So a number of the folks in like the Valley Network, for example, they had access to a loan guarantee, which you likely will never ever have called back anyway, would vastly accelerate the opportunity to build cooperative models, get into land trusts, et cetera. So with that all said, this is the opportunity now for us to kind of have engage in the conversation. So you have an opportunity to engage with Alice and a much deeper dialogue. And so I guess we could kick it off with a few kind of burning questions that people might have. Fantastic. Say your name.
Sure. Tara Marchand, Emerald City, Washington. And I'm working on a project, CARC, Increasing Communities around Progress. So this is fascinating. Thank you. I have two questions that came up. Two of you differently. For Vanessa, I was curious about 5 years in immigrants tend to be the ones to lean themselves to being cooperatives. And so the first thing I think of is like, well, do they have green cards? You know, how do they get funding? Like, and then that toolkit, is there a way that, you know, you can actually, you know, not be legally here and do that? So that was just a curiosity. And then exactly around the land trust, most of the situations that you shared were crisis situations. 19,000 houses was in a crisis. The land was an opportunity. And I started to think to Vanessa in terms of conversions. Where is the conversion process? I mean, I have a family home. We actually wanted to sell it to a family. And we went to churches and we went like, how can we like bring it to somebody because it's going to go on the market. We don't know what the hell it's going to be in the best of people who might own land, homes, don't have people want to buy it. How are they protected? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so I can answer the first question. So yeah, this question comes up here and there about immigrants sort of owning businesses. And so I can actually talk about this sort of in a broad way, not just specifically to worker cooperatives, that you are able to own a business without work authorization, in the sense that the sort of immigration law and the laws that pertain to ownership don't necessarily cross. And so just like in any regular business, a person would be able to just start their own business and be able to run it on their own and file taxes and all of that. And it's the same with worker cooperatives because they're regular businesses. And so there are
price. And so Carolyn North boldly moved her property into CLT because she had enough assets outside of her real estate that she could survive, her children could do well. And made essentially binded us to a partnership with another group called the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collaborative, which is very intentional about sourcing from within the community very proactively and having a very specific focus on Black and Indigenous communities. And that partnership has resulted in the need to explore how to safely transfer those properties that have such a high appreciated value, in a way that is legal, in a way that ensures that the tax rate, right, in that transfer can support affordability, can support the mission. And so we're exploring concepts, for example, such as an affordability easement that would help to enable that proactive folks in the community could attach an affordability easement to their property that transfers ownership to the land trust or to other entities like PREC that can essentially mechanize that, sort of proactive creation of affordability in our community. We're also focused on our next 10 years. This is our 10th anniversary. And so we're building up a campaign to create an acquisition fund, to be known more in the community as someone that you can put your property that you want to keep rooted in Oakland and with the people of Oakland into the land trust. And so that's the work that we're building up in terms of developing collateral and so on that really communicates that. One other opportunity in policy is we're attempting to pass a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. all the properties that we've gotten access to essentially recently have been because the owner was willing to sell, right? Either could be massaged into being willing to sell or wanted to do it. And so what the TOPA, which DC has had since the 1980s, would enable is in any case of a tenant occupied sale of property, that the tenants would have the first right of refusal and a timeline supported and enforced by the city in which to explore the feasibility of ownership and to partner with a nonprofit like the Land Trust to bring in additional resources to promote affordability.
This is the follow-up. So if you had an elderly person who didn't want to sell the house,
she's staying in the property through life, and that will create space for some tenants to occupy the property as well. But it's a solution in terms of retirement empty nesters. But we also we know we had a situation in Richmond that was communicated to us recently that a lot of elderly folks sometimes are underwater, right? Sometimes aren't able to maintain the asset. In particular, the concern to me is in African American communities, the asset can't be held by the families, and needing some kind of strategic solution and knowledge to be held so that those communities can figure out how to maintain assets, I think is another role. So in addition to helping to stabilize affordability, how do we help to stabilize communities that have been taken from, extracted from, to maintain what they have in terms of assets? It's another thing that I think Land Trust could explore.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sarah Souza. I work at California Reinvestment Coalition. Thank you for all the information you shared so far. This question is for Valerie and Zachary. So in talking about asset building and ownership, how do you see anti-displacement intersecting with sustaining ownership and building wealth? What are some solutions and best practices that you see, and also in holding institutions accountable and solutions that are addressing not only the lack of access, but also thank you.
Thank you for the question.
It's up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you all for the question. That's a really important one. So one of the things that I briefly glossed over when I was sharing about our fellowship is that we were very intentional in that fellowship design to work with 3 anchor organizations that are base building organizations. And that part of our work is really important. So that's APEN, Urban Hills, which is urban farmers in our community, and Rich City Right, which is a cooperative that grew out of efforts in the community to do, beyond just bicycle repair and bike access. It's really, reimagining health and sustainability in our community. I share that because those 3 organizations are also a part of a coalition called Our Power Coalition, which, as of 2 weeks ago, we've recently been invited to participate informally. That is really important because when we look at the idea of wanting to be a development entity, we don't want to be, because we're talking about disrupting traditional norms, we don't want to be a traditional developer that doesn't engage in these really important nuanced conversations around what anti-displacement means. And so I like to look at it from a protection, preservation, and production standpoint. In entering this coalition, the ask is that in this coming year, we do build that work around anti-displacement campaigns. And we're going to be doing that in lockstep and in collaboration with ACE, which I know was shared out earlier. In our community, and ACE in our local community has been really successful at winning a just cause, right for eviction and rent control ordinance in our community, which we know is limited given what happened at the state level. But those efforts are continuing and ongoing. And in our upcoming partnership in this year, and I've been talking to one of their lead organizers, and what I want to still empower and allow ACE is gonna move the work around rental protections and continue to do that. And we are reimagining what the production conversation is, because it's not just about increasing housing stock, it's about value-aligned production that's serving local residents. But there's a lot of synergy on the policy and advocacy side, and there's a lot of synergy around the preservation piece. But we need to make sure that we are closing all the loops, because we want to align in the laws that are made. We want to align in the projects that we move forward. We need to be interlocking that conversation and raising that conversation, because we have gotten to a point where people are using the term gentrification, but but not getting more granular on it. So as we unpack anti-displacement, we need to bring those 3 Ps along, and so that's work that's gonna be coming up in Richmond.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, on the tenant organizing partnership being really critical, especially with ACE and different entities like that. I always say, like, we talk about gentrification, which is framing of the problem, but we don't have a terminology for the solution. And so we should become more invested in that, of what it looks like to not gentrify, right? Or to have actual equitable development. Let's coin a great crafty term for that. The other part is beyond just working with tenant organizing is also the structure of our board. The governance of the organization ensures that 2/3 of the folks represented on the board are of the community, are of the residents that we serve. And I think that's transformation in terms of power, in terms of distilling very complex information about development to people. One of the major tensions in almost every community, I think, between tenant organizers and the development, right, is this opposition, right? We don't see enough development that reflects us. And so it's much easier to oppose than to commit to all the hefty learning that has to go into figuring out how to value capture or how to negotiate community benefit or how to get into the development game yourself, right? And so I think we've been trying to work through that tension to invest more tenant organizing groups in, like, the possibility that development can be reflective of us, can support our needs. And as we get to a wall at the State House, right, in terms of where they're willing to go on tenant protections, what can we do as a sector, CLTs and cooperatives, to help folks see that this is an upstream solution, right? We're getting rid of the landlord in the first place, right? We're getting rid of the need for rent control in a sense because we're investing in ownership. And I think we have a very dominant singular notion of what affordable housing means that needs to be eliminated. When we say affordable, what we're really talking about is LIHTC, right? That's the extent of it. And I think particularly those banks that have to do CRA need to start looking, in addition to LIHTC, what also needs to happen. Because LIHTC doesn't enable the preservation at the scale that we need it to happen in Oakland, right? So that's one part of it. But also, we realize that the other tools that we have in that basket, such as Section 8, right, enable market exploitation, right? In Section 8, rents have, and the voucher values have risen because we want to enable regional access. Great mission. What that's resulted in is the concentration of vouchers at inflated rates in certain neighborhoods, right? And so those rents always increase, the voucher value has to constantly increase, as opposed to investing that voucher in a housing stock, right, that's always going to be there, as opposed to investing that down payment assistance, right, 17% match that Alameda County is providing right now, right, in a housing stock that will be there for the next family that needs it, because in 20 years when that home is sold for $1.5 million, or maybe 4, who knows, right, that 17% match doesn't go as far. And so I think really investing tenant organizing and all the sectors who are interested in this, in the proactive solution. Last point, just really quickly, is like even with the tech money that's coming to fold, Google $1 billion, Microsoft $500,000, Chance Zuckerberg $500,000, most of this is loans at market rate, between 4 and 7% interest. So who's going to step up to actually make that money, all that capital that's being promised, accessible to the models that actually need it the most, right? The devil is always in the details, and it's a lot easier to oppose, right, than to get invested in details. Honestly, foundations don't provide capacity money to communities to invest education and knowledge and understanding the details. That just is how it is. So we have to just oppose it a lot of times to the feeling.
So we have time for 2 more questions. I have a question here, and then take yours.
Hi, Heidi Hickman with Cameo, California Association with Migrant Enterprise Opportunity, and my question has nothing to do with business ownership, which it usually does, but I was a resident on Telegraph in 2010 and saw the corner of Broadway and 27 was basically a bombed out old tower building. It is now like an 8-story high, probably 400 units, something like that building. The guy was holding onto it for years and years and years. It was years that it was, and that corridor was blighted for years. And what other policies, I mean, there's gotta be a holistic view that the city can take on housing, on development that's more equitable than actually, I mean, that could have probably been developed in 2010 for decent housing, much more affordably than it's being done now. Now you're gonna have $600,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think this is that, you know, there's bigger policies that I think our leadership needs to kind of embrace.
Maybe we'll get the last question too. Was that you, Les?
Zachary, I think you started to touch upon it when I was in Atlanta and visited the historic district development corporation. They were talking about how, they purchased the properties and sold them at, so that they could sell them at an affordable price to these families. And then as market values were increasing, those families then sold it for a higher rate. And now, new families, it's not affordable for the other families. So I was just curious what you're seeing as a solution to keep these homes affordable, and then how you're framing asset building for those families when they're seeing it as, because I can flip this house.
Right. So the two questions then. One, what are the things that like city political leaders can do to have embrace a much more equitable approach to real estate development, right? Then the more specific question around keeping local housing. So
the first, I spend a lot of time yelling at our city officials well, prior to the community's toolkit and what the actual, right? There's no affordable housing being built, right? And where the impact fee that we're charging to the ones who got in, only $22,000, that many market rate units to add up to Oakland. And so there needs to be comprehensive, like real attention planning around what can be done. Land trusts are just a part of the puzzle. I think I'd love to see the city creating land trust and some of the larger affordable housing developers. And San Francisco, which has a developed, actually creates a capital revenue source for its affordable housing trust fund, and hopefully that scales up to federal action, which I think is a possibility in 2020. And just the last question, that's a major tension in the CLT movement because there's a very correct mindset that Black folks in lieu of reparation should be enabled to gain market value, understanding that there's a $600 million undervaluing, right? That undervaluing is what precedes and enables gentrification, right? Is you intentionally extract from these communities to enable value creation for other communities, and then you have communities like Oakland that don't even do value capture, right? I brought about this, and so I think that has to be a conversation. To me, what we're doing in the land trust business is creating the type of, when we have been creating the to the existing speculative extractive housing market, right? That's worthy of the type of society that our children should. The extraction and the damages that this government and other institutions done to specific communities. But it's what, if we solve for those things, is the type of condition that should exist to enable us all to live there. And so it plays an important part of the puzzle, but I think that's a tension that exists, particularly in the African American community a lot, where folks say, well, this isn't a solution for us. And then I can always point back to the CLT movement and say, well, they're right, because not enough of your directors are Black, right? Not enough of your staff, not enough of who you're training, not enough of your outreach to masters of planning students or people who are interested in housing reflects communities of color. And so I can't easily respond to Black folks who say this isn't for us, because it doesn't currently reflect us in a lot of cases, And so I think a lot of that has to be talked about more in terms of asset creation, the value of efficiently investing in a solution that's always there versus the need for certain communities to catch up.
So now in our last remaining minutes, I just wanted to ask if there were any kind of like last takeaways that any of the panelists wanted to make sure that the folks who attended were able to take away with them. It looks like you're sitting here.
It's really inspiring. You want to rip off of what everyone is saying, and in Richmond, it's challenging. It's definitely been, history has been a pay-to-play, community. It's been one that right now is in kind of a scarcity mindset because we have structural deficit at the city level, and because we're not all the way there with even getting traditional investment, but we know that it's coming. Like, it's very clear that in the past 10 years, and we don't hear this surfacing a lot because we're in Oakland definitely. And Oakland has an exodus and has seen the shifting demographics. It's historical community, and I want to raise it in Richmond. We've seen of our historical Black community leave Richmond, and so this issue is very personal. And I'm thinking about, because the piece around like the city, our city has done well because we've had a progressive city council to implement inclusionary housing laws and inclusionary different like support services. but we're still not addressing the fact that 35% of our Black community has left already. And that's what really got me into this work is, you're working super hard to change conditions. When you look up, who are those new conditions serving? And the fact is, we need to also do that work to reach out. A lot of our folks are in Stockton, the Black community in Stockton is in East County of Contra Costa. So as we're thinking about a citywide policy, because this is what we're pushing with Point Melody and we'll continue to push in other development projects, a right of refusal, we're looking at that right to return and making sure that those options are not only available to folks that were able to weather that, the Great Richmond who are still in Richmond, but folks who, we effectively want to bring back, because that was a historical Black community that has a legacy there, and we want them to be a part of this legacy moving forward. So that's just something that's stayed on my mind from what was shared. There's a lot of opportunity for the partnerships, and while the city's in a challenging place, that doesn't preclude us from engaging in different policy efforts and looking at the county, because we have our incorporated North Richmond that looks like it will stay unincorporated for some time to come. So how do we start getting active in Contra Costa County, knowing that we're a small segment of Contra Costa County, and in a lot of ways I think we live in a county that is low income, that does not reflect the larger demographic in the county, but we have to engage as we're looking at prospects for housing bonds and other opportunities, because we may be tapped out in areas around the city being able to do that, but that's not going to stop us from seeking other opportunities. And where I'm hopeful is that we can stop being seen as combative to not just city council. Really with us, it's building a relationship with city staff, folks that are moving things, because you can hear the sweet, I don't want to say sweet nothing because I feel like that's too harsh on the council level, but we need to be, in close proximity with city staff and really showing them, positioning these things, as viable and as solutions to everything that we know that the city is in need of.
I would just say that in terms of the field of worker ownership, I just wanted to say that it's really something that's picking up, that it's not something that is a niche area really anymore. There's been a lot of uptake on the part of cities around the country, whether to develop worker cooperatives, technical systems, a lot of different kinds of supports. And there's a lot of really interesting models happening out there of institutions with, looking at organizing through legacy business initiatives, like I was mentioning before. Conversions are a big thing. And so I think that it's really something to keep looking at and to really look at investing into, because it's really picking up, and I think it's a really true and tried model, to build wealth, in communities.
So right before I hand the mic back to Simona, I think one of the things I would say, particularly for the funders in the room, Zach and others have mentioned this, education is really important, and at the same time, there's been enough practice and application that the barrier no longer should be about how to do it, because there's enough to draw from and which you can actually implement. So I just think, the takeaway from that is if you're listening to fund or invest in something, it's not as though it's new, right? There's enough body of work to actually inform you about how to get forward on it. That all said, can we just get an applause for
And I also want to include a great thank you also to Rodney for moderating that wonderful panel. So I just want to remind folks a couple of things. One, we've actually recorded this session, so if you have colleagues who were not able to come, we will be sending out a link, the link. And two, please do fill out the surveys that are on your chairs. That really helps us understand the programming that's most relevant for you. And three, for the funders who are joining us for the next portion, we'll start about 12:15, so there's enough time to go to the restroom, do a little more networking. But we will be starting probably at 12:15 downstairs in the workstation. So thank you, McCarthy. Sorry, thank you so much again, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Nice to see you. I was just actually talking to Sabrina at the East Bay Community Foundation about how we were in that conversation about opportunities on the progress. So they're moving forward with having the future of partnering or seeing what happens. Gosh, we've got like so immersed in like all of our work this year that we just couldn't. Yes, there's still interest in that, and we've done other things. So we partnered with there's a collaboration between Social Venture Circle and so that's kind of that was kind of looking for the great to jump into while we're managing everything else. I haven't looked at the full perspective. I mean, I know people are engaged in
Good. We were in
That's right. I was like, and I was going to mention something else when I saw you. That was it.
What do you want to talk about? Yeah, you should email me. Here, let me give you my card. And we don't need to make it small. We take well, once we find it, I'll sort it out with and every day.
Some organizations that are starting and starting so we figure out how around that. We, I think, as you know, are investing in more broadly with the sector individual partners. So that's sort of the shared services. Stabilization trust starting to focus on aspects of how we all move together. I mean, I want to start entirely secondary economics level, but I think that's a little too ambitious.
That's really good stuff. Well, I'm going to do our book is I guess it's finally not the first topic, so I'll send you one. It's not public, but so I'll send you that copy. There may be some stuff in there.